Khabib Nurmagomedov has stayed relevant in the world of MMA even after his retirement. The former champion has made a permanent place in the hearts and minds of all fight fans. Maybe that's why media outlets hang on to every word he says and everything he does. Today, we're going to be looking at some of the recent news related to Khabib. First, let's look at Khabib's plan for his Islam Makhachev. The Eagle wants his cousin and protege to follow in his footsteps and retire at the top of his game. Khabib decided to hang up his gloves at the peak of his abilities after he defeated Justin Gaethje at UFC 254. He left the sport with an undefeated and unmatched record of 29-0, winning the hearts of a lot of people over the years. Since then, Khabib has been a force behind Islam Makhachev and his ultimate claim over the UFC title. Recently, Nurmagomedov revealed his 3-year plan for Islam and his future in the octagon. Khabib said that Islam needs at least 5 to 6 title defenses. 6 fights in 3 years would be ideal according to him. He went on to say that after that, Islam can maybe leave the sport for good, as no one can stay on top forever. Khabib knows what it's like to retire undefeated and undisputed, and that's probably what he wants for Islam as well. As much as people love controversy, there's none to be had here. These guys are like brothers, and we know how loyal they are to each other. Khabib genuinely wants what's best for Islam, and that's why he wants him to retire at the top of his game as well. Next up, how Islam clinched the UFC title. Khabib's late father, Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov, wanted Islam to take over the reins after Khabib. Even after coach Abdulmanap passed away, Team Eagle executed father's plan perfectly to make sure that Islam became the UFC lightweight champion a year after Khabib retired. Even though Makhachev was doubted before every single fight, Khabib kept believing and vocally supporting him through it all, and Islam did deliver. In October of 2022, Islam had to face Charles Oliveira inside the octagon for a shot at the UFC's lightweight title. Oliveira was supposed to be Makhachev's toughest opponent yet, according to the experts and analysts. He was the better striker and the better grappler. Islam had little to no chance in the fight. Islam and co. proved them all wrong once again. His performance and utter dominance in the fight silenced all critics. In the fight, Islam came out to be the better striker as he managed to land several shots, and he came out to be the better grappler by scoring more takedowns. Oliveira had been notorious in the division for his submissions, and his previous opponents were afraid of going to the ground with him. But for Islam, it was just another day's work as he was able to submit Oliveira in an arm triangle in the second round of the fight. With this win, Makhachev secured the title that Nurmagomedov left behind in a statement victory, showing to the world that the lightweight UFC title belongs to the Dagestani boys. Following up, let's look at the journey ahead for Makhachev. Islam and Khabib wasted no time after they secured the lightweight title. Right after the fight, they challenged Alexander Volkanovski and invited him inside the octagon. Volkanovski obliged and accepted the challenge, with the two fighters shaking on it. The Great has dominated the featherweight division for years now, going unbeaten throughout his entire professional MMA career. He was also recently made the #1 pound-for-pound UFC fighter, and so he was looking to move up a division into a lightweight. Volkanovski was said to take the fight against Islam before Oliveira stepped in. In his first ever title defense, Islam looks to go ahead against UFC's featherweight champion and their #1 pound-for-pound fighter. Moreover, the bout will take place in February of 2023 in the Australians' backyard in Perth, Australia. If Islam manages to win, he'll take over as the #1 in pound-for-pound rankings. However, it won't be easy. Khabib himself admitted that Volkanovski is a tougher opponent than Oliveira, and rightly so. The guy had dominated the featherweight division for years now and had smashed every single one of his opponents. After Volkanovski, Islam will probably take a fighter from the lightweight division. Facing Dustin Poirier may be inevitable, and with his victory over Michael Chandler recently in UFC 281, he may be the next contender for Islam. There is also a possibility of a rematch between Islam and Charles Oliveira. Reports suggested that UFC wanted to book an immediate rematch, but the Brazilian turned it down as he needed a mental break. So Oliveira may be on the cards again soon for Islam. Moving on, in other news, Bas Rutten leaves Khabib out of his top 4 for UFC's Rushmore. One of the most hotly debated topics in the MMA world is the discussion of the GOATs of the sport, and what better way than to etch it into stone forever. In an interview, the UFC legend Bas Rutten was asked about who he'd pick to feature in UFC's Mount Rushmore. He opted for for John Jones, Ronda Rousey, Conor McGregor, and George St. Pierre, leaving Khabib out of the list. He went on to elaborate on his choices, saying that Jones has to be there for what he has achieved already. He went on to become the youngest UFC champion at the age of 23. Since then, he has given us so many memorable fights. Even now, fight fans all over the world await his return to the cage. Moving on to his next choice, he admired Ronda Rousey and what she had done for women's fighting. She opened the doors to the octagon for young women around the world and inspired them to compete professionally. McGregor was probably his most controversial choice, but the way he explains kind of makes sense, to be honest. Rutten recounted a story with his mom who doesn't follow MMA. He was surprised when she asked him about Conor McGregor, which means that the Irishman's showmanship brought in a lot of new viewers and fans to MMA. Rutten didn't elaborate much on his last choice, GSP, except that he'd pick GSP over Khabib. We might have to ask Khabib to be sure, but we think Khabib would agree with Rutten on that, as he has publicly admired GSP multiple times. Up next, in other news, Khabib's reaction to the 13-second knockout by McGregor. Conor McGregor went up against José Aldo for the featherweight title back in 2015 at UFC 194, and in only 13 seconds, the Irishman was crowned as the champion, establishing a landmark victory in the history of the UFC. As McGregor's left hand landed on Aldo's jaw, every single jaw dropped in the MGM Grand Garden Arena. The crowd was left stunned as the Brazilian legend crumbled to the floor. This also included a younger Khabib standing beside his manager Ali Abdelaziz and Frankie Edgar. Following the knockout, Khabib can be seen putting his hands up on his head and looking on in disbelief at what had just happened. He can then be seen shaking his head as he makes his way out through the crowd, stopping briefly to pat Dana White. McGregor had been confident as usual during the build-up to the fight, even though Aldo's reputation was pretty formidable. However, no one could predict that the Irishman could end the fight in just 13 seconds. This sent shockwaves across the world of MMA, and Nurmagomedov's reaction represented what the whole of the community felt. McGregor himself looked somewhat shocked at the shortness of the fight. He apologized to Aldo, telling him that they were going to have to go at it again. He felt Aldo was a phenomenal champion and that he deserved to be in the cage for a little longer. Now, let's talk about what happened next. McGregor and Aldo formed a friendship based on mutual respect after the fight. The Irishman won the UFC featherweight title but never actually defended it. Eventually, he was stripped of the belt due to his inactivity. José Aldo later went on to reclaim the UFC featherweight title after defeating Edgar. After doing so, he revealed that McGregor congratulated him with the gift. The Brazilian was promoted to undisputed status after fighting for the interim version of the championship at UFC 200. Next, let's look at Khabib's relationship with McGregor back then. The feud between the two seems to have been going on forever now, but most people often forget that back then they were very friendly. The Irishman was a featherweight and hadn't yet set his eyes on the lightweight division. They admired each other and had lots of mutual respect. They even had friendly, good-natured exchanges on Twitter, and they even had a picture together after McGregor's win over Poirier at UFC 178 in September of 2014. Things started to heat up since the Irishman made his way into the lightweight division. Khabib had been doing work in the weight class and had been unbeaten ever since he stepped into the octagon. McGregor skipped the queue as he got a shot at the lightweight title against Alvarez. It was supposed to be Khabib fighting Alvarez for the championship, but the UFC withdrew the contract from the Russian once they got word that McGregor was available. Understandably, this pissed Khabib off, and it was obvious from his statement as he cited McGregor's match against Nate Diaz where the Irishman tapped like a chicken. Finally, Khabib takes on McGregor. The bad blood between the two stewed for a couple of years, and finally it reached fever pitch, with McGregor insulting Khabib's family and his faith, as well as trying to physically assault him by throwing a trolley at his bus. Things got out of hand. The two men took on each other inside the octagon, and it was there that Khabib was able to shut McGregor up for good. After a dominating performance, the Russian Bear submitted McGregor out in a rear naked choke once and for all, ending any doubt of his superiority inside the cage. Khabib still thought that reconciliation was possible between the two and said so in some interviews, but McGregor still kept taking jibes at the Russian, and in a very insensitive tweet, he even targeted Khabib's late father. So this brings us to the end of today's video. What do you guys think of Khabib and his protege? Do you think he deserves his place on UFC's Mount Rushmore? Let us know in the comment section below. Also, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our our channel for more interesting videos. See ya!